How does an intelligent, capable woman or man stay inside of a system that contradicts their values or their beliefs? And it's not just some series of bad choices, bad luck, or ironic relationship patterns. You have been telling yourself that story for the last 15 years. How long are you going to keep repeating it to yourself? Our deepest wounds were formed by the time we were around 7 years old that make sense in our minds at that age. So typically the phrases of our core wounds that resonate the most with us are ones that have very simple language, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not smart, I'm dumb. It could be I'm unlovable, or I'm broken, or everybody's better than me. Part of your identity becomes that you override your own discomfort to make other people comfortable, because you have trained your nervous system that shrinking is safety and not shrinking is the opposite of safety. And I say, if it's been like this for 8 years, why do you think it will suddenly change? And I'm not saying that if you've been mistreated or if you've been abused or anything like this, that it's your fault, but your patterns are your responsibility. Hello, and welcome back to the Wild Way Home podcast. Today, I want to talk to you and dive deep on a single question. How does an intelligent, capable woman or man stay inside of a system that contradicts their values or their beliefs? How do those systems quietly rewire identity, perception, and choice? And what deals does a high-functioning, highly capable woman or man make with themselves to survive? If you've been in bad relationship after bad relationship, maybe you've noticed the same patterns or the same dynamics across those relationships. Maybe you've had patterns of disrespect or tolerating behavior that you said you never would. Maybe it's patterns of feeling inferior in relationships, feeling like somebody else is above you or better than you or talks down to you, and that's the dynamic that you're used to. Or maybe you chronically have self-doubt and second-guess yourself. You're not broken. And it's not just some series of bad choices, bad luck, or ironic relationship patterns. It's an invisible pattern that has been deeply reinforced across time, across situations, across people that trains you to shrink or tolerate or stay or second-guess yourself. So relationships are the place that these monsters, we'll call them monsters, are the most visible, because it's where these typically invisible patterns are the easiest to see. They show up the fastest and the strongest. And because relationships are often the most painfully affected areas in our lives. That's actually why I talk about relationships so much. But I want you to see where these patterns have lived the longest, and it's in your relationship with yourself. So before we can dig into any of the patterns, we have to start with the stories that we tell ourselves, and we have to break free of those. We cling to stories for so long that aren't true, and they just anchor us in place. So a really great example that I have is I grew up and in my childhood, there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of fighting and conflict. And I grew up and I told myself and I told my significant others that I'm not good in conflict. I don't know how to resolve conflict healthfully. I've never seen conflict be resolved well. And I don't do well with XYZ, with yelling, with raised voices, with disagreeing, because even the smaller things to me felt so much larger on that scale. So I remember there was this one instance with a guy I was dating. We were standing in the driveway. We had gotten into a disagreement, and I remember feeling everything ramping up inside. And I said, I just want you to remember, I'm not good with conflict. I don't do well with this. Remember how this was when I was little. And he stopped me and he looked me in the eyes and he said, Caitlin, you have been telling yourself that story for the last 15 years. How long are you going to keep repeating it to yourself? And in that moment, that clicked for me because I was like, wow, I've been living in this story. And I think I was about 28 at the time. And I could choose differently. I could choose to learn how to be better in conflict, choose to turn the page and not be so stuck in what my past had defined for me. Because it didn't actually set me up to be bad in conflict. I just grew up around conflict that wasn't resolved well. And I realized that if I kept telling myself that story, it would be another 15 years. And I'd still have the same problems. I'd still have the same patterns. So I greatly appreciated that conversation in the driveway because it snapped me out of it for that story. And it's these stories that we don't even realize are stories we tell ourselves. We just accept them as truth, as fact about ourselves, and we keep moving. I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that they said was, my parents didn't set me up for success. I never even had a chance. And it's been 20, 30 years now. And that story is still the one that's overriding. And we had to pause. And I said, is that a story that you're willing to let go of? Because that's keeping you stuck. That's keeping you from making decisions that will allow you to set yourself up for success, that will allow you to step into the life that you want. If you sit in that story, we're at this lower energy frequency that we're putting out, emitting into the world, and we're drawing in everything around us to stay at that same frequency, to stay in place, and we're preventing ourselves from stepping forward, from vibrating at a higher frequency, from living a life that is one step forward of where we are. And so if we have this half of ourself or a foot anchored in the past, in the story that we've told ourselves because we never fully moved on from it and we never realized that we have the choice to keep moving, you're not going to be able to move forward. And I think that's such an important lesson because in any story that we tell ourselves, it trips us up over and over. Whether it's my parents didn't even give me a chance, or I'm not good at conflict. Whether it's even something like you get out of a relationship and you can't let it go, and so you're so focused on who you were and how you were in that relationship and the future that you had, but it's been 2 years and you're still tripping over that story because you haven't moved on from the identity from back then. And that's what this is about. So as we keep moving forward, once we start recognizing the stories that we tell ourselves, we also have to begin to be aware of the deeper wounds that we have. Now, our deepest wounds were formed by the time we were around 7 years old, because in that early childhood, we are just trying to make sense of the world. We're highly sensitive, and we draw these conclusions that make sense in our minds at that age. So typically the phrases of our core wounds that resonate the most with us are ones that have very simple language, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not smart, I'm dumb. It could be I'm unlovable, or I'm broken, or everybody's better than me. Like these are the things that get so ingrained with us. And if we think of this as a trauma ball that I've talked about before, like the threads run so deep. And then over time, there's this snowball effect, and it gets bigger and messier, and the threads just weave through every part of our lives, and everything comes back to the deeper wounds. And so that's why we have patterns. That's what the patterns are there to protect. So how do we even begin to start working through these? You have to follow the pattern through the pyramid. You have to start with the visible part of the pattern. So now if we go back to the original question, how does an intelligent, highly capable woman or man stay inside a system that contradicts their values or beliefs? How do these systems quietly rewire perception, choices, and identity? What deals does a highly capable, highly functioning woman make with herself to survive? So if we go to that observable piece of the pattern in this pyramid where we have the observable part, which is where it begins. So we have the trigger, the people, the situation, the thing that kicks it off. And then we have the observable response. Maybe it's what you do, what you say, something that somebody could see. And then the next layer, we have the identity that behavior over time positions the identity into. And then we have the deal we make with ourselves, the strategy that we use to carry out the deal, and the deeper meaning that all of it points at. We have to follow that through the pyramid. So today, one of the patterns that I wanted to talk about was shrinking. I call this pattern Be Easy because it's about being an easier version of ourselves to digest, to be accepted. We just shrink. So if we look at behaviors like staying quiet to avoid escalation, softening, diluting, or retracting what you're saying mid-sentence because you're not sure how it's going to land or you can see how it's landing in real time. Maybe it's enduring raised voices or contempt or ridicule without response. If we look at behaviors like constantly taking blame to restore peace instead of addressing the harm that was caused. Maybe you're not pushing back on inappropriate comments or behavior that don't sit well with you, but you don't do anything because you don't want to be too much. Or maybe it's avoiding hard conversations, especially if they went poorly in the past or you were punished or it had some negative ending. These are the things that condition us over time. And so if we look at these behaviors as the example of pieces of the same pattern of shrinking, if we do it once in the moment, in our mind, it's not that big of a deal. But once it worked. So now the system recalibrates and it's like, ooh, this is an option. This gets us out of discomfort. So then once becomes many times becomes a pattern. And over time, the pattern positions you to have a new identity or a different identity. So the pattern reinforces this belief about ourselves and who we think we are. So those behaviors specifically for this pattern of be easy and shrink might position your identity to make yourself smaller, just by default, to accept disrespect and internally or outwardly reframe it as miscommunication or they were having a hard day or it's okay because insert excuse here. And so you just continually accept it over and over. Part of your identity becomes that you override your own discomfort to make other people comfortable. Or maybe you just ignore your gut reactions to avoid disruption of any kind because you need to be palatable. So what this does over time is the pattern shows you who you're allowed to be. And it teaches you to remove or self-edit anything that doesn't fall into that container of I'm allowed to be this. I'm allowed to be this non-disruptive, palatable version of myself. So it teaches you to be quiet. It teaches you to be non-disruptive, undemanding, and digestible. And everyday recognition, like these are the small moments that go unchecked. They're not these huge moments in our lives. And that's how it gets under our radar and it slowly builds. Maybe nothing necessarily went wrong, but it slowly adds up over time when the same behavior, the same move that you use is getting used over time. So to you during your day, that could be having a conversation with your partner or in a meeting where you're pausing mid-sentence because you decide it's not worth finishing or you notice somebody wasn't listening. It could be softening what you said because of how it lands or because of how you perceive it to be landing in the moment. And so you start switching what you were going to say and doing the mental gymnastics to make it okay for the people in front of you. Maybe in the middle of a day, you swallow your reaction because right now is not the time and I'll bring it up later, but then later never comes. Maybe you let something land on you wrong. You know it feels icky. You don't like it. But again, it's not the right time. In everyday examples, it could be apologizing to smooth things over when you're the one that got hurt. It could be editing yourself to fit in with the friend group or to have the picture perfect relationship or be who you think your partner wants you to be or be who you think would fit best with your partner, a version of yourself that you're not. And I'm not talking about stepping into self-growth and who you want to become. I'm talking about stepping away and disconnecting from yourself, losing your inner authority and editing yourself. It could be a moment as small as laughing something off that didn't feel funny, or not asking clarifying questions because you don't want to be perceived as difficult. I share all of this with you because the translation here isn't that the pattern is about fear or conflict itself, even though you're constantly trying to smooth things over. It's about the belief that your presence might be too much. So you make yourself easier to hold by shrinking and making yourself easier. And the strategy that we use to carry all of this out, it's self-abandonment in an attempt to preserve safety. Because when the system believes that something bad is about to happen, it forecasts this. The system believes that something bad is about to happen. It makes a quick assessment in the moment and it calculates a solution for the fastest way to neutralize that fear. How do we make sure that this fear isn't worth fearing? Well, the easiest answer is to accommodate a seemingly small sacrifice by removing or modifying the self in the equation. Because that's the only thing that we can change. That's the thing that we know we can control is ourself. So if I just change myself to make this environment okay, it will be okay. And that's how the system recalibrates over time. But what happens is as it recalibrates, it compounds over time. And now it becomes the default strategy. Now you're constantly abandoning yourself. You're constantly erasing yourself. You feel disconnected. And you're like, how did I get here? And then anything but abandoning your voice feels uncomfortable. It feels so uncomfortable to stand in your truth, to be fully seen, to be fully heard, to have an opinion, to disagree with somebody, to do anything that isn't shrinking, because you have trained your nervous system that shrinking is safety and not shrinking is the opposite of safety. It's dangerous. So then when we get into the conversation around relationships and unmet needs, this is how it compounds over time. We want to be the best partners that we can in the beginning. And when we have this deeper meaning of either I'm not enough or I have to earn love or they're better than me, we have this internal wiring that adapts our behavior to try to be enough. So we spend our lives and our relationships trying to compensate for the voids within us. And then maybe over time, I noticed that when I brought up something that hurt me and I got punished for it or it didn't go well, I learned and I was conditioned that this doesn't go well, so I'm not going to bring it up again because I want to restore peace and have safety. And it's little moments like that that over this time horizon, so many things change. Because now I don't bring up when something hurt my feelings. Maybe I'm not bringing up my needs that aren't met. I'm not revisiting a conversation so that we can repair and bring ourselves closer. And in that, I'm also telling myself that it's okay that my needs aren't being met. And so I'm creating a reputation with myself there that we don't get what we need, that we don't need what we need, that we don't get what we want, and that it's okay to settle for less than that and to tolerate that. And so then what happens is this snowballs into tolerating other things. Maybe it's tolerating disrespect over and over. Maybe those situations escalate and you don't say anything because you want to be palatable, because you want to be easy, because you want to avoid the conflict. And so all of this snowballs. And later on, when you look back, you're like, how did I get here? This was not how it was in the beginning of the relationship. It was so great if we can just get back to being that. And I see this in so many relationships. And I talk to so many women who are like, I just want to be able to get back to where we were before. And it's been 4, 6, 8 years. And I ask them, like, is it okay if I ask you a direct question? And they say, sure. And I say, if it's been like this for 8 years, why do you think it will suddenly change? And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not judging. I'm genuinely asking because what has happened over time is the entire relationship has recalibrated. You have recalibrated. And so we can't hope that our partner will change. We can't hope that the dynamics will change. It's not that the relationship dynamics alone have to change. It's that you yourself have to recalibrate all of the shit that has happened to the operating system over time. You have to reprogram that. And so unless that work is done, even if work is done on the relationship and you learn techniques to communicate better, it's not going to hold because you're going to fall back into your patterns. And I'm not saying that if you've been mistreated or if you've been abused or anything like this, that it's your fault, but your patterns are your responsibility. And the patterns are what keeps us in relationships where our needs are unmet. And our patterns are also what keeps us in relationships thinking that we can't leave when we're being mistreated and feeling like we should be grateful and feeling guilty or shameful that we want to leave something that's not good for us, that doesn't respect us, where we're not happy. So going back again to the question of how does an intelligent, highly capable woman or man stay in a system that contradicts their values and their beliefs? It's the recalibration over time. It's the self-talk. It's the patterns based on protecting the deeper wounds that keep us shrinking, that keep us abandoning our voice, that keep us accepting that, well, this is okay because I want to be palatable. I don't want to disrupt. And whether those phrases are true for you or not, like you have your own phrases. These are just examples. But if you're in a situation where your needs are not met, or if you're in a situation where you tend to shrink by default, you have some inner dialogue that justifies that being the strategy that you use. And it's about working through that, figuring out why, and catching yourself when you want to do that, and understanding that you're going to have to reprogram that operating system so that you can step outside the pattern. And it will be uncomfortable initially. But as you heal those deeper wounds, the I am not enough, the I have to earn love, the I'm dumb, whatever it is, that will also become easier because now you're not fighting such an uphill battle because the self-worth is there. So as I said at the beginning, it's, if you have problems in a relationship, there's what's happening in the relationship and then there's what's happening with you. And if you don't address what's happening with you, the relationship won't get better. I love talking about this. I love leading women through this process. And I'll send you a document that outlines exactly what happens when women are in situations where they're having a hard time leaving and they're having difficulty discerning, but they already kind of know. And so they go back and forth and they end up staying for years. And then they have these things that they tell themselves of, well, it's the finances, or I have to wait until this milestone in life, or I have to wait until X, or I have to wait until all of these things. So that document lays out a lot of how I would approach that situation because I have been there before. So if you just go to my Instagram and you DM me Break the Loop, you can get that completely for free. You don't have to give me your email. You don't have to give me anything. It's just a resource for you. But I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you want to see a specific pattern, just leave it in the comments and I'll do my best. I'll see you next time.